What's going on? My name is Robert, and you are watching Southpaw Auto Works. In this episode, we're back on our Fix and Flip series, part 2 of an '08 Chevy Colorado, hosted by Andy. Without further ado, let's dive in.
Okay, we're back on Andy's Dandies here. Number 2 on our Colorado, '08 Colorado that we picked up here. Needed a transmission rebuilt and also had some oil leaks and some other stuff we had to take care of. We ended up taking most of the engine apart, timing cover off the front. We found that we had a guide for one of the timing chains that was coming loose in the front of the engine. Actually found that down in the oil pan itself. So I removed the oil pan, got in there, took the timing cover off. We did 2 new chain guides for the timing chain. Ended up taking the oil pan, the pickup and everything apart, cleaned it all out, checked it all out, made sure everything was good. And then while we were at it, on the back of the engine, we had to replace a guide for the balance chain. There's a chain that runs off the back of the engine to 2 balance shafts, and we had to do that also. But I've wrapped most of it up now. We've got the engine back together. We're ready to actually do the initial startup on this thing. I've got oil in it. I've got transmission fluid in it. We don't have any coolant, any water mixed in there yet, but we've got everything else hooked up. Like I said, we've got oil, we've got trans fluid and everything. We also did some work on the front end of the Colorado here to kind of dress it up a little bit. The headlights and the turn signals were all faded out on this thing. We replaced the bumper, replaced all those. Had to remove the grill to get all that stuff out, but wasn't a big project, but I think it dresses the truck up a bunch. It'll help us on the resale part of it, and that wasn't that expensive. Also on the interior, we'll take a quick look. You've seen from the previous video that the seats were pretty well torn up, not just the cloth, but also the cushion material. So what I opted to do was just go ahead and get them all recovered with a new pattern. You can't buy the original pattern anymore, the truck's too old. So we've got those redone. The cup holders were also busted out of it. I've got those off of the internet, put those back in, so that's dressed it up pretty nice, I think. And the glove box, if you remember, was laying on the floor. The hinge on the bottom was busted off, so we got that through one of the parts recycling yards, replaced that. So already I think it's dressed up pretty well from what we started with. Thinking maybe get rid of the floor mats that we've got, put some carpeted ones in there, and of course we've got to finish bolting the seats and the seat belts back up. But I think the seats and everything there is really going to dress it up nice, make it a lot easier to sell. We've got the engine back together. Like I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and do a quick startup test here, see if she's going to run okay. I did crank the engine over when we had it apart before we finished it up, before we put the spark plugs back in. We'll make sure that it'll build oil pressure. Our timing chain guides and timing chain tensioners are adjusted out with that oil pressure so that we don't have any issues. Like I said, we'll just do an initial startup, see if she'll run. We're not going to run it too long without any coolant. I cycled the key a couple times to make sure the fuel pump's running and filled up the injectors and the fuel lines, get the air out. Got a good startup. Oil pressure light went out. And that's good enough for a test run before we get our coolant in. Run it for long term, make sure everything's good, no leaks. Okay, so we're going to show you a really cool way to fill a cooling system here. Alternative to just dumping in your antifreeze and water and waiting for it to the air or bubbles to come out and so forth. This little tool we've got right here called an air lift. We're going to use the shop air to power this thing up and refill the cooling system. And what this does is we hook this little guy right here into the neck of the radiator or the fill bottle, whatever it happens to be. They've got different adapters and so forth that go on there, just whatever it takes to fill or fit the top of the radiator. And what we're going to do is just simply turn this, expand that rubber grommet to where it fits tight in the top of the radiator. Okay. Need a tight seal in there. All right. Don't want to get too carried away, break the plastic. We've got a refill hose that we'll show you on that later. First of all, what we're gonna do is connect this guy into the little coupler right here. Plug that in. Then we're gonna use shop air right here, okay? And what we're gonna do is create a vacuum through a venturi inside of this little valve right here, okay? And we're gonna draw the cooling system into a vacuum. And when we've reached the proper amount of vacuum, 20 to 25 inches, whatever it can achieve, we'll close the valve off here. And what we'll do is test the cooling system at that point by creating the vacuum and sealing it off. We wait a couple of minutes, make sure our gauge does not drop down too far on our vacuum here. And we know at that point we've got a good tight cooling system seal. We can go ahead and start dumping in whatever we need, not worry about a leak. How many times people will take and put a water pump or a thermostat or something on, put a radiator in, go to refill it, and all of a sudden you've got coolant or whatever running out the bottom. This way we test it first to make sure we're good. So we take our shop air, we're gonna plug it in here. That's gonna create a vacuum in the cooling system. I'm watching the gauge here. It's quickly climbing up as far as inches of vacuum. We're already above 15 inches of vacuum, reaching 20. What this has got is a gauge here with a red and then leads into a green, which is in the 20 to 25 inches of vacuum range. It's a smaller cooling system, so it doesn't take very long for it to draw into a vacuum. Okay, we're climbing up to about 22, 23 inches of vacuum here. Making our way into the green zone on this gauge itself, vacuum gauge. What I'm gonna do is close the valve off, disconnect our air hose. Now what we're gonna do is wait about a minute or so. We're gonna keep an eye on this gauge, make sure that it does not drop too far down. They say in about a minute's time it should not drop too far on that gauge, indicating that we've got a good tight cooling system, no leaks. We'd be safe to go ahead and start adding our coolant at that point. And then we've got the suction hose to refill it. Connect that on. When we're ready, we'll open both of these valves, hook our hose down into our bucket of coolant, and draw it back in. Okay, we're ready to refill. We've got our bucket full of coolant and distilled water mix. We need to get our pickup at the bottom of the bucket. Okay, we're going to open up the valves here, use the vacuum that we've drawn into the cooling system to actually pull the fluid right back into the engine itself. All right, we just let that go until the gauge drops back down to 0 and it stops drawing our coolant. When it stops drawing the coolant back in there, then basically cooling system's full. It's purged. There'll be no air bubbles, no air pockets in there to worry about. Basically, we can put the radiator cap on. All we've got to do is fill up the overflow bottle and it's ready to roll. There's no burp in it, no worrying about it. Okay, looks like we've pretty much stopped. We still show about 3 inches of vacuum, but it's pretty well stopped drawing coolant back in there, which means it's going to be full. So we'll close the valves off. Here, we can go ahead and disconnect our fill hose here. Try and get the rest of that out of there. Set that aside. Okay. We take our adapter off of here. And cooling system should be filled just about to max capacity right now. Every once in a while you might dump in just a little bit, but the main thing on this is that you don't have to worry about any air pockets or air bubbles. It's drawn enough back in there to fill it back up, like I said, and then a little bit in our overflow bottle. We're good to go.
If you're interested in adding one of these tools to your toolbox, we've got links in the video description down below. Thank you for joining us on this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by hitting that like button. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line in the comments section down below. If you haven't done so already, subscribe and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. We've got a lot of stuff in the works right now for you. If you're interested in helping this YouTube channel grow, there are a number of ways that you can get involved. Check out the video description for more information. Catch you next time.